March 9, 1945. Mariana Islands, Pacific Ocean. Dusk settles over the American airfields on Guam, Saipan, and Tinian. Along runways carved from captured Japanese territory, ground crews complete final inspections on 325 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses. Major General Curtis LeMay, in command of the 21st Bomber Command, has authorized the most dramatic shift in bombing methods yet seen in the Pacific. Inside bomb bays loaded past normal limits, crews stack cluster munitions holding 1,520 M69 incendiary bomblets per plane, each packed with napalm designed to burn at 1,800-degree F. The mission is strategic and controversial. The Shitamachi district of Tokyo, a dense warren where 750,000 residents live in wooden houses jammed into barely 12 square miles. At 17:35 hours, the first polished B-29 lifts away from Guam's North Field. Out of the darkening light rises the steady thunder of four Wright R-3350 engines as aircraft after aircraft climbs into the night, flying singly rather than in tight boxes, stripped of most defensive guns so they can haul nearly twice the usual incendiary load. Pathfinder ships lead the stream and will paint the target with a blazing X visible for miles, followed by the main force releasing from just 5,000 to 7,000 feet, a sliver of the altitude the Superfortress was built to use. What follows will lay bare the crushing force of American incendiary doctrine and show why Japanese air defenses, however determined, could not stop the most consequential single air raid in history. The Boeing B-29 reached the Pacific as World War II's most advanced airplane. The program demanded over 1.44 million engineering man-hours and a $3 billion investment, more than the Manhattan Project's $1.9 billion. This four-engine heavy bomber introduced pressurized compartments, remotely controlled turrets, and the most powerful piston engines ever put on a production aircraft. Factories across the United States shared the build. Boeing lines at Seattle, Renton, and Wichita, Glenn L. Martin at Omaha, and Bell Aircraft at Marietta, Georgia. Each Superfortress measured 9 feet from nose to tail with a 141-foot wingspan. Driven by four Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclones rated around 2,200 horsepower each, the B-29 could haul up to 20,000 pounds of bombs over a combat radius of roughly 1,600 miles, reach ceilings above 3,800 feet, and sprint to about 357 mph. By March 1945, American plants had turned out about 2,000 B-29s to line units, with production climbing toward a wartime total of 3,170. This scale spoke to U.S. industrial reach. Boeing's Wichita plant alone averaged 4.2 Superfortresses per workday. The 20th Air Force, reporting directly to General Henry Hap Arnold, first deployed B-29s from Chinese fields in June 1944, then from the newly seized Mariana Islands after November 17, 1944. The 21st Bomber Command operated 3 wings in the Marianas, the 73rd and 313th on Saipan, and the 314th on Guam. Together, these formations could commit more than 300 B-29s on a single operation. Each aircraft kept flying by specialized crews working around the clock. Facing them, Japan's air defense network showed stark disadvantages. By early 1945, the Imperial Army and Navy ran separate, poorly coordinated commands that shared little information. Their primary night fighter, the Nakajima J-1N Gecko Moonlight, was a hurried conversion from a reconnaissance platform, armed with twin 20mm Type 99 cannon angled upward about 30 degrees and another pair firing downward, enabling attacks from unusual approaches. In practice, Japan produced only 439 Geckos in total, and many were gone by 1945. The Kawasaki Ki-45 Toryu Dragon Killer served as another night fighter, mounting a 37mm nose gun with oblique 20mm cannon. But just 1,171 had been built since 1941. Without airborne radar, intercepts at night relied on searchlights and the naked eye. Poor tools against fast bombers in darkness. Ground defenses did not bridge the gap either. Fewer than 500 heavy anti-aircraft guns guarded Greater Tokyo. The Type 99 88mm provided the core high-altitude screen, while the Type 98 20mm covered close ranges with an effective ceiling near 11,500 feet. Most critically, fire control radar for flak batteries was missing. Crews leaned on optical sights and sound locators that failed in bad weather and during night raids. The balance of numbers told the story. While the Marianas alone could launch hundreds of B-29s, Japan could muster perhaps 200 operational night fighters across the home islands by March 1945. Fuel shortages strangled training. New pilots logged little time after dark. Aviation gasoline was so scarce that aircraft often sat idle, held back to save fuel for the expected American invasion. Major General Curtis LeMay took over the 21st Bomber Command in January 1945 and inherited a bombing effort that had not delivered decisive results. Previous high-altitude precision raids at 30,000 feet faltered in the jet stream. Winds above 200 mph blew bomb patterns miles off aim points. Engines suffered too. Climbing heavy to those heights pushed the R-3350s hard, with magnesium parts overheating past safe limits. Cloud decks hid targets roughly 70% of the time, pushing crews to depend on early radar sets. After dissecting these problems, LeMay chose a radical new approach that would redo the air war over Japan. The changes, however stark, were logical. He ordered all guns removed except the tail armament, freeing each B-29 to carry about 7 tons of incendiaries instead of the typical 3.5 tons of high explosive. Dropping to 5,000, 9,000 feet would slip beneath the jet stream, lessen engine stress, and sharpen accuracy. Striking by night would reduce exposure to fighters that lacked radar and seasoned night intercept pilots. Individual aircraft would ride Loran radio beams, streaming across the city over several hours rather than massing in tight formations. Weather officers forecast ideal conditions for March 9th to 10. Clear skies and strong surface winds likely to fan flames through the target area. Targeting underscored the strategy. American planners prioritized districts where dispersed cottage industries, tiny shops embedded in homes, turned out aircraft components, electrical parts, and precision instruments amid residential streets. Intelligence used OSS maps and pre-war Japanese planning records to rank Tokyo wards by infrastructure density. The chosen zone in northeast Tokyo covered Asakusa, Honjo, and Fukagawa, working-class neighborhoods packed tight, where extended families lived in timber homes separated by narrow lanes. The M69 incendiary was a refined tool. Each hexagonal steel tube measured roughly 3 inches across and 20 inches long, weighing about 6 pounds. Unlike earlier thermite or magnesium charges that burned hotter but could sometimes be doused, the M69 used napalm, jellied gasoline developed by Standard Oil and academic chemists, which clung, spread, and resisted water. Released in E-46 clusters of 38 bomblets that broke apart around 2,000 feet, each M69 trailed a cotton streamer to orient its fuse downward. On impact, a 3 to 5 second delay burned, Then a white phosphorus burster ignited the filler, flinging burning napalm across an area up to 100 feet wide in multiple spurts. The delay ensured the canister lay on its side when it went off, maximizing the horizontal spread of flame through structures. Tests at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah, using replica Japanese houses, confirmed the M69's ability to seed many ignition points with napalm that stuck and resisted dousing. A single B-29 carried 40 clusters, 120 bomblets, and 279 bombers, ultimately reached the aim area from the 3 at 25 launched. Operation Meetinghouse would scatter about 424,000 incendiary bomblets over Tokyo, an unparalleled concentration. Planners calculated that such density would force a self-sustaining firestorm as individual blazes joined, creating powerful winds to drop the flames past the initial pattern. The first B-29 left Guam shortly after 5:30 p.m. on March 9th, flown by Mission Commander Brigadier General Thomas Sarsfield Power of the 314th Wing. Through the evening, aircraft launched every 50 seconds from the three islands. The 14-hour round trip pressed crews and machines to their limits. At the lower altitudes, men wore lighter gear rather than heavy cold weather suits. With guns, gunners, and ammunition reduced, the Superfortresses climbed cleanly and saved fuel on the 1,500-mile run to Japan. Near landfall, the white cone of Mount Fuji served as a prominent checkpoint. Air raid sirens began in Tokyo around 10:30 p.m., but most residents stayed put. Past high-altitude raids had done limited harm, and complacency had set in. Civil defense was not built for what was coming. Tokyo had just 18 reinforced shelters able to hold roughly 90,000 people in a city of 4.3 million. Most families relied on bugo, shallow trench shelters covered with boards, or simple dugouts that offered little protection against fire. The city fire service counted about 8,000 firefighters, largely equipped with hand pumps and bucket brigades fit for peacetime blazes. Neighborhood associations raised civilian teams of mostly elderly people, women, and teenagers with sand pails and water tubs. The first Pathfinder B-29s reached Tokyo at 12:08 a.m. on March the 10th, approaching from different bearings to lay markers. From barely 5,000 feet, they dropped M47 napalm bombs that bloomed into bright, obvious beacons, an immense burning X. The mainstream arrived minutes later, aiming at the illuminated cross. Weather proved decisive, excellent visibility, and surface winds between 17 and 28 mph, surging in places to 40 mph. As the M69 clusters broke apart and fell, witnesses described glittering shapes tumbling through firelit skies, moments before destruction on a scale not yet seen in modern cities. In minutes, thousands of distinct fires sprang up across the aim zone. The winds leapt flames from house to house, and separate blazes soon fused into a vast, coherent inferno. Ground temperatures rose beyond 1,800 OF, hot enough to soften glass and metal fixtures. Superheated air drove fierce updrafts and vortexes that lofted debris high overhead. Roadways became impassable as asphalt burned and timber buildings collapsed under the heat. The roar of the fire drowned everything, and smoke and heat cut visibility to a few feet. A 24-year-old Yoshiko Hashimoto was at home in the Sumida district with her 13-month-old child when the attack began. Her husband, an Army officer, was on duty across town. She later recorded her account. The B-29s were dropping so many firebombs it sounded like heavy rain. I was stunned by the scale of the raid. I had never seen anything like it. As flames advanced, Yoshiko fled with her parents, baby, and sisters into streets choked with people. Shitamachi's tight lanes turned lethal as thousands tried to escape at once. Families were split apart in the crush, and elderly people who fell could not rise. Fire crews abandoned gear when heat made any approach impossible. At the Sumida River, Yoshiko saw chaos. Burning fragments fell around us, and the wind kept rising. Signs, wooden doors, and household things were airborne. Warehouses on both banks burned fiercely. Her father pushed her and the infant into the water, an act that saved them, while her mother, father, and sister Etsuko perished. Across Shitamachi, scenes like this multiplied. Those who took to canals found water near boiling in places. Many were swept or crushed as masses surged toward riverbanks and ponds. The firestorm winds were strong enough to move bodies, and some victims were found far from where they began. Police substations, hospitals, and designated refugees were ringed by flames. At Kikukawa Elementary School, a marked shelter, investigators later found only metal and remains where hundreds had tried to ride out the raid. Buddhist temples that had stood for centuries burned, taking with them those who sought sanctuary inside. Even in shelters, heat and smoke inflicted fatal injuries. Superheated air scalded lungs within moments. After the raid, casualty counts diverged. The U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey listed 87,193 dead and 40,918 injured. Tokyo's Metropolitan Police cited 83,793 dead and 40,918 wounded. The Tokyo Fire Department estimated 97,000 killed and 125,000 hurt. Most historians agree that more than 100,000 people died, more than the immediate deaths at either atomic target. The attack destroyed 271 structures over 15.8 square miles, erasing roughly a quarter of Tokyo's buildings. More than 1 million survivors lost their homes. Industrial consequences were severe. Over half the city's output came from small home-based shops. Their loss crippled production of essential war goods. Thousands of skilled craftspeople vanished or dispersed. American losses were comparatively light. 14 B-29s did not return, and 96 airmen were listed killed or missing. Several crews hit extreme turbulence from thermal columns rising off the fires and lost control. Others took flak hits during low-level passes, though gunners struggled to engage aircraft at such atypical heights. Airmen later reported smelling smoke even at release altitude. Some who had doubted LeMay's gamble were sobered by what they saw. LeMay later weighed the moral burden. "I suppose if we had lost the war, I would have been tried as a war criminal." General Arnold sent a stark commendation. "This shows your crews have the guts for anything." The results reshaped American planning overnight. Within 10 days, similar night incendiary raids hit Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, Japan's 4 biggest cities now in the crosshairs. The campaign paused only because stocks of M69s ran out. Production surged immediately as American factories prioritized incendiaries. The gap between American and Japanese capacity had widened to its limit. The United States could replace a lost B-29 within weeks. Japan could not rebuild shattered neighborhoods or replace missing workers. U.S. industry outproduced Japan roughly 10-1. Technical advantages made American munitions far more effective pound for pound. The $3 billion B-29 program alone exceeded Japan's entire 1945 military budget. By mid-1945, America was making about 50,000 tons of incendiaries per month, while Japan struggled to supply basic ammunition. The American approach was methodical and science-driven. The Chemical Warfare Service had erected full-scale Japanese house blocks at Dugway based on pre-war blueprints. Standard Oil's research arm developed napalm through extensive testing. Harvard and the University of Chicago contributed studies on fire spread. This integration of research with operations contrasted with Japanese doctrine that favored traditional spirit over material factors, an approach that could not answer modern data-driven warfare. Japan's inability to field effective countermeasures became evident. Despite a destructive February 25th trial raid that burned 28,000 buildings, authorities made few improvements. Proposals to cut fire breaks by demolishing rows of houses were not adopted widely. Evacuation concepts remained paper plans. Military leaders insisted civilians stay put even as intelligence warned of mass incendiary attacks. These outcomes flowed from inter-service rivalry and leadership limits. Night fighter units showed the technical gap. Pilots like Lieutenant Sachio Endo scored notable successes, credited with 8 B-29 interceptions, but such cases were rare. Most night fighters never found targets in smoke and darkness, especially once fires obscured the sky. Without radar, pilots relied on ground direction using acoustic locators, techniques that failed once the city roared into flame. Those few who reached the stream often found 20mm rounds insufficient against the rugged superfortress unless they struck engines or fuel tanks. Some resorted to ramming, trading their lives for a single bomber. Tokyo's fire service reflected deeper infrastructure limits. The city fielded 286 engines, mostly manual pumpers requiring crews of operators. Water pressure lagged, and damaged mains starved nozzles. Doctrine focused on saving individual buildings by traditional means, useless when thousands of ignition points erupted at once. When the firestorm took hold, most companies were quickly overrun, equipment ruined, and crews forced back. The psychological aftershock ran deep. Many survivors concluded every protective system had failed. Refugees leaving Tokyo carried harrowing accounts that clashed with official statements about the war. Factory attendants slumped as confidence collapsed. The phrase routine air raid entered daily speech as dozens of cities were methodically targeted. By August 1945, 66 Japanese cities had suffered major incendiary attacks. Much of urban Japan lay in ruins even before the atomic strikes. The success of Meetinghouse fed into planning for Operation Downfall, the proposed invasion. Analysts estimated that continued firebombing could erase what remained of industrial capacity by October. LeMay believed strategic bombing alone might force surrender without landings. Joint Chiefs' assessments suggested conventional bombing had already caused roughly 900,000 civilian casualties and would cause millions more if the war dragged on. Such judgment shaped President Truman's choices on atomic weapons, framed not as alternatives to conventional bombing, but as potentially decisive psychological blows. The human weight crossed national lines. American crews carried the memory for years, wrestling with what they had done even in wartime. Richard Bale of the 9th Bombardment Group recalled seeing fires distinctly from altitude, an image he could not shake. Japanese survivors lived with lasting wounds. Families on both sides bore losses that echoed across generations. The raid left orphans and widows in numbers that overwhelmed relief networks, compounding post-war problems. The morning of March 10th revealed the scope of ruin. Hospitals, schools, temples, and ward offices inside the AIM area were gone. Where eastern Tokyo had been, stood only brick and concrete shells amid miles of ash. Survivors wandered through landscapes they no longer recognized, searching for landmarks erased in hours. Cleanup required heavy equipment. Many victims could never be identified. Mass cremations continued for weeks. Canals and rivers stayed clogged with wreckage. The industrial shock ran beyond first estimates. Tokyo's east side housed thousands of specialized family workshops. Precision fittings, electrical parts, fine instruments, and machinist work. Their loss severed supply chains feeding large factories. The disappearance of veteran craftsmen and technicians, people trained over years, could not be made good quickly. Productivity stumbled even in intact plants as workers struggled with grief, homelessness, and broken morale. After stocks of incendiaries were replenished, the campaign resumed in May with refinements that made it more efficient. By July, B-29s often dropped warning leaflets before raids, listing cities that would be hit next. Psychological operations underscoring absolute air control. Missions became almost routine, sometimes meeting little resistance. Japanese defenses thinned as pilots were lost, ammunition burned up, and civil defense unraveled. Questions of law remained debated. The 1907 Hague Rules addressed bombardment of undefended towns, but definitions of defended and military objectives proved elastic. Post-war tribunals charged certain leaders for civilian targeting, but did not address Allied area bombing. The emerging precedent that military necessity could justify broad civilian impact shaped later humanitarian law even as precision weapons improved. Weather magnified the effect at Tokyo and showed American use of environmental factors. The March 9-10 timing exploited predicted high winds after a dry spell. Meteorologists studied Japanese patterns intensively to pick nights that would favor fire spread. In the event, local gusts of 1745 mph exceeded some forecasts. The tight weave of meteorology and operations typified the American method. Individual crews experienced the night differently than planners imagined. Many struggled with the scale of destruction below. Smoke layers and violent thermal disturbances were felt at bombing heights. Pilots fought through turbulence driven by rising hot air. Some airmen later asked for reassignment, unable to reconcile duty with conscience. Others focused on ending the war sooner. Japanese command and control showed its limits. Flak batteries fired continuously but achieved little in the smoke and chaos. Fighter squadrons launched roughly 90 sorties with scattered contacts. Fire chiefs received little warning of the raid's true scale. Military units prioritized government sites while neighborhoods burned. Communications collapsed as lines failed and messengers could not cross the fire zone. Post-war memory has shifted over time. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which became global symbols, Tokyo's firebombing remained less known abroad. Survivors campaigned for decades to record what happened. Katsumoto Sayotome, himself a survivor, helped found the Center of the Tokyo Raids and War Damage to preserve testimony that might otherwise vanish. Remembering vast civilian loss while acknowledging wartime context made commemoration complex. Military professionals still study Meetinghouse for what it teaches about air power. The raid showed that razing cities does not ensure immediate capitulation. Japan fought on 5 more months. It proved technology could overcome distance and geography, while exposing how thin the line is between military and civilian targets in total war. The slide from precision to area burning revealed escalation in practice. The 21st Bomber Command began with doctrine-driven precision raids, then shifted under operational pressure to night incendiaries that were simpler to execute and far more destructive. This was a chain of field decisions rather than a single policy decree. By March 1945, urban area strikes had become normal, with aim points chosen for population and industry density rather than discrete factories. Survivor accounts record deep trauma. Many lived with it for decades. Children separated in the panic often never learned their families' fates. Yoshiko Hashimoto's words remain in the archives. The memory of that night never leaves me. My mother, father, and sister died. My baby and I survived. I think of them every day. Working-class Tokyo's social fabric was unmade. Extended families scattered. Traditional trades vanished. Neighborhood webs built over generations disappeared in a night. Judging Operation Meetinghouse ultimately means weighing its part in ending the war. Scholars still debate whether bombing alone could have forced surrender, but the raids clearly sped Japan's unraveling. Systematic urban destruction created conditions that made continued resistance increasingly untenable. Emperor Hirohito later referred to the bombing campaign and domestic crisis among the reasons for capitulation. The 100,000 who died in Tokyo became part of a calculus meant to end a conflict that an invasion might have prolonged at a cost of millions more. That logic offered little comfort to the living, but influenced strategy. The story of Meetinghouse shows how modern war moved from clashes between armies to struggles that engulf whole societies. Neighborhoods built over lifetimes were wiped out in hours by weapons made thousands of miles away. A war begun by expansion ended with technology falling on civilians who had little say in it. The contrast between B-29s dispensing advanced incendiaries and Japanese responders armed with buckets and hand pumps underscored the decisive role of industry and science. History's irony is that this raid's impact was overshadowed months later by atomic bombs. The greater immediate toll on March 10th faded beside the singular nature of nuclear arms, leaving conventional area bombing under less scrutiny. In the years that followed, nations continued to develop and use incendiaries and other wide-area weapons without the taboo attached to nuclear devices. Statistics only hint at the truth. 325 B-29s launched, 279 reached the city, 1,665 tons of incendiaries fell, 15.8 square miles burned, 171 buildings destroyed, about 100,000 dead, roughly 1 million left homeless. Behind each figure were people, American crews carrying out orders, Japanese families in crowded districts, children separated in the panic, survivors living with irreparable loss. Operation Meetinghouse remains the most destructive air raid on record, not a triumph to celebrate, but a stark reminder of what modern war can unleash, where strategic aims are weighed against vast civilian suffering and whole populations are drawn into an industrial-scale conflict.